MRAs came into my mentions again this past Thursday morning, thanks to Dean Esmay, the former lapdog for A Voice for Men. And he tagged in his token Black MRA pal, Obsidian Files. Along with a few more MRAs, they filled my mentions with faux concern about Black men's lives, using Walter Scott's death and issues with child support non-payment to attack me and all feminists for the still patriarchal perspective the government acts on in regards to child support via criminalizing non-custodial parents. Specifically in South Carolina, one of the only states that demands a minimum 4 months prison stay for those non-custodial parents who are behind in child support payments, as well as putting the cost of the prosecuting attorney fees on them as well. Now, I wasn't aware of Scott's child support issues when the news broke out of his murder by that police officer. And even if I had been, it wouldn't make me think he was less of a person or deserved to die, especially over something like missing child support payments. I also take issue personally with non-custodial parents being criminalized harshly by judges. In South Carolina, the judge can hand down any type of sentence they see fit, which leaves a lot of room for judges to project their internalization of anti-Black racist concepts via giving Black fathers longer and harsher sentencing, and in Scott's case, robbing him of the means to start paying back the money he owed and to support himself. And this is something that MRAs might have learned about me had they bothered to genuinely ask me instead of attack me. I will give some props to the Twitter user Shooter D for having a pretty civil Twitter discourse with me. There's things we won't agree on, but when I replied back to him, the convo was pretty civil. It went pretty cool. I think the thing that was still getting lost is this assumption that all feminists agree on the same thing. And that's not true. Feminism is not a monolithic ideology, and feminists are not a monolithic group. And just because you see some feminists do a certain thing or say a certain thing, that doesn't mean that all feminists agree with it, or that all feminists go about things the same way. Shooter D came at me thinking that I didn't think that child support laws needed reform, which isn't true. Most of the laws we have in this country still have a protectionist, patriarchal, traditionalist origin, and they need to be adapted to current times. The parts of child support law that Shooter D and I think MRAs in general think were created by some, feminist gynocentric conspiracy or whatever, they've actually been a part of child support laws as early as 1910 with the Uniform Desertion and Non-Support Act and the Uniform Reciprocal Enforcement of Support Act, created in 1950. More non-custodial parents these days are women, and families aren't comprised of only straight people, or just, the mother and the father or what have you. So men aren't, or they shouldn't be expected to be the primary financial provider in the eyes of the courts just because they're men. And the laws need to reflect that. But sadly, not all the discourse on Twitter went well. And this goes back to the Twitter user Obsidian Files. Now, that dude is a true coon. 100% Sambo, who masturbates to the Moynihan Report. If you missed part 1 of this video series where I got into the Moynihan Report and why it's a piece of shit, it's from 1965, And it postulated that the main cause of issues within the Black community is the breakdown of the quote-unquote traditional family, aka single motherhood, and Black mothers entering the workforce. As if, again, Black women have never had to support themselves and their families by working. We've always had to work. But, never mind all that, because, Black feminists somehow sold out the Black man and took their jobs, which is utter bullshit. Institutionalized racism allowed for discriminatory practices of not hiring Black men for jobs, but hiring Black women, as if we were lucky because we were seen as, harmless. Not to mention that the only jobs we could get were as nurses or domestics or, like in the South, agricultural work. But I digress. Obsidian Files hates Black women and blames Black women for pretty much everything that has gone wrong in the world in regards to Black people. So he's basically like Tommy Sotomayor's brother. Despite Black women and Black feminists being heavily involved in, if not the creators of protests and activism for civil rights for all Black people, especially when Black men are killed, that doesn't matter to Obsidian, because Black women are killing all our babies via abortion and promiscuous and need to keep our legs closed and feral and not deserving of respect and scheming baby mamas who discard their baby daddies to get them welfare checks. Even in the face of facts such as these. It's unconstitutional for states to deny needy families welfare benefits due to men being in the house. The Supreme Court struck that man in the house law down with the 1968 case of King versus Smith. Now, that's not to say that social workers and caseworkers on the city and state government level discontinued pushing that bullshit for eligibility after 1968, coupled with the fact that not everyone in general goes into looking into the rights they have as applicants for public assistance and all that. But as far as the man in the house law still being actual law, it's not. Secondly, abortion is an elective medical procedure. It's not murder, so stating so is a provocation, not a statement of fact. And if the rates are so high, which he didn't cite a source or anything like that, so who would know, those rates wouldn't be as high if, say, 30 out of the 50 states of America didn't stress abstinence-only sex education over more comprehensive sex ed, and not putting restrictions on access to birth control methods like condoms and hormonal birth control. Not to mention the states with abstinence-only education have the highest rate of teen births. And before anyone goes into the Margaret Sanger was a racist route without historical context, save your breath. You're basically pulling the reproductive equivalent to the Black people should still be Republicans because that's the party that ended slavery argument. Seeing Black women as feral is not only misogynist but racist as well. I call Obsidian Files a coon because he has internalized and projects anti-Black racism and self-hate by reducing Black women to the other via calling us feral, as well as suggest that we keep our legs closed, which perpetuates the racist Black women are hypersexual and promiscuous stereotype, and asserting that white women raise Black boys better than Black women, asserting the racist Black women are promiscuous, therefore bad mothers stereotype. Even though traditionally white women have leave the child rearing to their Black female slaves, which is where the mammy stereotype comes from. But I digress. In order for him to feel justified in treating Black women like shit, he others us and dehumanizes us. Just like Massa. asserting that black single mothers also scheme to kick their children's fathers out to get welfare benefits runs contrary to history as well. Prior to the Civil Rights Movement, black people were denied welfare benefits everywhere, but mostly in the South by city and state governments. This was done to keep black people in a perpetual state of indentured servitude to white people, just like sharecropping. And although it was the advent of technological advances in agriculture that led to, blue-collar black men losing their jobs and led to the Great Migration up north, those black families and black people who stayed in the South were either denied benefits or had them taken away due to farm labor during the growing season. Black single mothers, North and South, were left with little choice but to work on farms or other places for low wages to support their families, or engage in illegal means for monetary support, or return to the men they left, often due to intimate partner violence in the home. That also spits in the face of that whole black women betraying black men via getting, all the jobs narrative and adopting feminism from the white women. As I stated in part 1 of this series, black women have always been feminists because we've always been equal to black men, and it was the oppression of black women by black men because we as a group adopted the white cis heteropatriarchy to adapt to life in America and assimilate into the culture. That is what resparked the black feminist womanist movement in the 1960s and 70s. The hate and resentment that AfroMRAs have for black women flies in the face of history, and they are nothing but useful idiots for MRAs like Dean Esmay and Janet Bloomfield, who pretend to care about the plight of black men as long as they can be useful to their goal of attacking women, even if it means engaging in misogynoir towards black women via calling us Aunt Jemimas for being feminists, or, in Janet Bloomfield's case, using right-wing tropes to assert that white women raise black boys better than black women because welfare and feminism and we need to stop hating our men and boys. Yes, Janet, we angry black women hate our men and boys so much that we create new civil rights movements like Black Lives Matter and organize the National Moment of Silence after the murder of Mike Brown, organize protests after our men and boys are killed by the police and all that. And yes, sure, black women are such shit mothers, yet we raise our sons and our daughters well enough to graduate high school and continue their education, and we've always been good enough to raise white women's children, whether as their mammy, their wet nurse, or the nanny/domestic worker for white families. But fuck facts and all that shit, because they get in the way of you projecting your ahistorical, racist, misogynist, tired right-winger perspective and making yourself feel good as you posture yourself as the arbiter of knowledge of black people's issues. While perpetuating racist stereotypes about black women yourself. Try harder, Miss Ann, because a blind man can see your tired-ass tactics a mile away. See, this is how reactionaries like MRAs operate. They grab onto concepts and vernacular used by feminists and progressives and use them to hide their shitty perspectives behind so they'll look more socially acceptable and paint themselves as the ones who really care about equality and cry that the progressives and the anti-racism advocates are the real bigots. It's such a flawed tactic, really, often used and abused by the GOP, libertarians, gamergaters, etc., etc. And never mind the history of MRAs like Dean Esmay giving country to radical right-wingers and neo-Nazis during his time on A Voice for Men, and how it's still racist to pretend one is above race when it comes to black men, yet engage in racism and misogyny towards black women. But apparently that doesn't matter to AfroMRAs because it gets in the way of the narrative that black women are evil and shit, just like Massa and Mistress said. It's sad, really. Such a sad sight to see certain black men coon because they're so desperate for any slither of power and to be a man according to white supremacy that they've swallowed anti-blackness down. No chaser.